So, Dungeons. Welcome to the first episode of Dungeons and Dragons in Design. Games, Dungeons and Dragons. And yes, there are already videos on YouTube discussing about how the game works. We're going to be delving into the design and behind the scenes of how to create your very first dungeon, and or if you're a veteran to the game, giving you some reminders and refreshers for those who are already experienced. This video will feature information on the crafting and basics of dungeoneering and discussing how to improve on the very basics. Beyond that, we're going to be discussing further developments in further videos. With that out of the way, let's talk Dungeons and Dragons. Each dungeon that the party will come across will find itself with three very specific things: occupants, loot, and sometimes all three in between. Wait, did I say three? Oh no, traps! Specifically, to make a dungeon, you will need two entry points: starting and ending. Those 2 points are crucial and usually the bare minimum to having a dungeon. The entry point is where the players are going to begin their adventure into the dungeon. Such points, more often than not, include and are not limited to the main entryway into the dungeon, some kind of staircase that might lead into it, or some other way that you may have found that the players are inside. Maybe they teleported in. Stop teleporting your players into dungeons and having them have no way out. And then there is the final room. In which case, it usually is the room where either a powerful creature, like a boss, resides in, a room where loot might be found in, or sometimes a combination of the two. Sometimes often including traps. Did not say three on this one. Adding additional rooms beyond the starting and ending point of a dungeon, of course, will increase the playtime from sometimes hours to full-on sessions. And sometimes this is great. This, of course, means that the dungeon has to be rewarding to go through. Do not make your players go through a dungeon that is not rewarding, unless if you want to punish them for something, in which case go right ahead, I guess. Now, for the first thing, you gotta ask yourself, how long do you want this dungeon to be? A few rooms will do the trick for a couple of hours worth of the dungeon, but adding multiple rooms and multiple levels will extend the playtime and run through of the dungeon exponentially. And with more rooms comes more challenges. And with more challenges, the players will be depleted of their resources, and that's important. But also, you have to consider how many combat encounters you're going to be using. And that's one of the most important things about the dungeons themselves in Dungeons and Dragons: combat. Players will find themselves more often than not facing the denizens of a dungeon, and they're usually not friendly, at least not out of the bat. And when combat occurs, the players are going to have to expend said resources to go through with it, and we're going to talk about resources later. But this means that undergoing a dungeon isn't cumbersome. Do not be fooled. I am not saying for monsters to be tough here. Even weak monsters that are large in numbers will still drain resources from your party and or will drain time from your timetable. Remember, undergoing combat encounters requires multiple rolls that are standard issue for the encounter, such as initiative, the thinking of strategy, and of course rolling dice for certain attacks and or spells. And yes, even if weak monsters have to make up in number for the combat to be entertaining and effective, they will more often than not chug through more time because you're rolling multiple rolls for multiple creatures. And for those who are thinking if the wizard will just use a fireball or other spell to magically clear out a room of enemies, that is still using resources. And that is what you should strive for, to provide a fun, entertaining, sometimes educational experience to your players, while having them use their resources in a way that is both vindicated to the players themselves and also feels fulfilling to them. So, back to dungeons. When you make a dungeon, apart from the first point and the final point, you will find yourself having to figure out how to make the experience unique. Combat encounters are the go-to for most dungeon masters, and everyone really, to make the dungeon experience fun and entertaining. But you can also enrich it with puzzle encounters, will challenge not the player characters themselves, but the players instead, but you may also have them use their intelligence or wisdom scores to undergo the encounter, or you may implement lore encounters, which will allow you as a dungeon master to enrich your world and inform your players about specific things like foreshadowing certain events that might come to pass, or give them more information on things about their backstories intertwined with the world, or what has already happened down. Oh, and let us not forget the most powerful of encounters, The social encounter, which is quite literally usually compiling around the persuasion, intimidation, and sometimes performance skill. Bards rejoice. And then there are hallways. Yes, it is the main pathing tool of the dungeon, and yes, you can have encounters in them, but please do not immediately jump to put encounters in hallways. Or if you do, at least I implore you to make the hallways a little bit bigger than just 5 feet so that more players can interact with the opposing forces and or hazards that they will encounter so that they're not just stuck in the back. A word of warning as well. The higher level a party is, usually that means that the more difficult the encounters they're going to be facing are going to be. With the higher level of the party, the encounters they're going to be facing is also going to increase in both the time requirement to complete them and or the challenge of the encounter itself. And combat in D&D will take resources away from your players, such as spell slots or class traits, and those can only be regained through rests. Rests are vital to a dungeon crawl. Sometimes a short rest is going to be the most powerful tool that the party has in their disposal, and short ones help out with replenishing some of the more commonplace traits for most classes, while long ones, although not usually the first go-to tool, will replenish a character's resources immediately and to the fullest extent. Some players will try to cheese it. If you want to give your players a rest, rooms that have already defeated enemies, puzzles that have finished, or lore locations are some of the best locations for the players to take a moment of respite in the hour that usually takes to take a short rest, unless if your game is more gritty. Now, if you don't want your players to take a rest, then I suggest that you use either reinforcements in the form of enemies, other hazards in the dungeon, or usually just the combination of the two to make their lives a living nightmare. Or you could just, have the enemies poke them so that they don't rest. And then we have the end game, and that usually revolves around the boss, the most powerful creature in the dungeon, and how the players are going to attempt to fight it, and its luckies. Don't just have the enemy be alone. Usually that won't end well for the enemy. Beyond any of that, the the room that the dungeon boss or manager or whatever you have for the dungeon is going to be remaining in also will be probably specialized for that creature. Brief note here, yes, although the final boss room is the most interesting and usually the room that you're going to be placing most of your work in, it doesn't mean that your players automatically will be interested in that room more than any of the other quirky, unique rooms in the dungeon. Sure, where the undead king remains in the bastion of the dead and the unhallowed sure is interesting. But the party ranger is going to have much of a better time remembering the times when they were in the goblin dens, they were finding their way through the goblin catacombs, and they found the pen of the wolves where they got to pet and keep some of the wolf cubs. Give your players cubs. They will love them. Anyways, back onto the boss. Yes, the final boss room usually will have some kind of theme around it, specifically onto the creature that populates it. For example, if a creature that does not require usually moving throughout the tiles of the room or the floor at all will usually have the floor be very much trapped. A beholder, for instance, off the top of my head, will have the room's floors be immediately trapped so that any interloper that comes within it will have to play by its rules and have a terrible time doing so. Or if your final boss is a dragon, for instance, say a black one, usually, since they have the ability to swim and breathe underwater, they are much more likely going to be having their horde be protected by a small lake that they're going to be using to dive in to evade danger and being targeted by the party. Shrewd as always. Now, these rooms can just be 20 by 20 box rooms that you can just throw a powerful monster in, but adding more variation to them and making them more unique to the individual monster, perhaps even to their identity, will make the fight much more memorable. There are already pre-distinguished themes in Dungeons & Dragons about certain monsters. For instance, dragons, specifically red ones, love dwarven outposts so they can just plunder in, use the traps already set by the dwarves to halt adventurers and thwart them, and if they manage to make it through, burn them. But you might think to yourself that you can actually prepare something much more unique, and that's the point of Dungeons & Dragons, is that you have the artistic freedom to do whatever the fuck you want. So you could actually have your dungeon be populated, or let's just say populated. Let's say that you want that necromancer idea and you're interested in it being in some kind of crypt. But you think to yourself that the ruins of a castle might be more interesting, and that the necromancer is a druid who is attempting to restore their land through necromancy. Perhaps the party not only fights off against the dead, but other plant creatures such as vine blights and shambling mounds. Now that will leave an impression. Ooh, also, music! Music is important so much in the game. It will immediately make both the dungeon and generally the game that you're running 10 times more interesting. Do not forget music. If you have ambient music playing in the background as the players are undergoing the dungeon, it will make the entire thing feel much more real, much more believable, and so much more interesting to the players. Sure, the room where the lava is in is obviously dangerous, but if you have lava playing in the background, the subtle and slow noises of lava flowing will keep the players on their toes, and very likely going to jump at the first opportunity to try to traverse it using their own wits. Just try not to fall in. Alright. This is mainly the video regarding how to set up basic dungeons and how to design around them. I will make more videos in the upcoming future discussing more of my ideas that I can implement into a single video due to my own time schedule of running too many games of Dungeons & Dragons, participating in too many games of Dungeons & Dragons, and also still learning about everything. But precisely on that point, for the next one I want to discuss some of the more intricate parts of the game, including, but not limiting to, the way that the game handles cover, the lighting sources, and, well, actually, the surroundings and how for the players to use them. Anyway, thank you so much for watching so far. If you are interested in the content that I'm producing and find yourselves more interested in keeping up with it, please subscribe to the channel so that you can get a notification for when the new videos come out. Well, thank you so far for watching, if you did, and, well, I appreciate it. Have a wonderful day, have a wonderful night, and until the next video comes out, thank you very much.